stage Bonnie Spindler.
Hi, everybody. So we've all been sitting a super long time, and we've been networking and all that kind of stuff. Can everybody stand up for just 2 minutes and kind of like do this, and then shake your hands like this, like crazy. If you don't feel silly or you're laughing, you're not doing it right. You'll thank me later. All right, is that better? Okay, so I picked a super easy topic for today. Can tech save the world? And I think we can handle that in 15 minutes, don't you? It's a binary question, yes, no. So this tapestry is from the 17th century, and you see the unicorn in the corner. How many people here would like to be in charge of the next unicorn? 3 of you? Really? That's it? Oh, come on. You guys don't want to be in charge of a unicorn? Let's go. So everybody in this conference is sort of looking forward. We're forward-facing people, right? We hardly ever think about our backs. We're always looking forward, and we're looking to the future. And the tech conference does that really, really well. But what I'd like to do is change up the paradigm and hopefully get you to look at things a little differently today. I want to change the way that you see yourself, your job, and your role in the world. So again, easy task for 15 minutes. So who knows who this is? Anybody know who this is? Yeah? Exactly. So Rook took a walk in the woods, and he met some fairies in the woods. He drank some beer. He went to sleep. And when he woke up, his dog was gone. His gun was rusted. And he didn't know what was going on. He went back to the town, and literally 20 years had gone by. The entire life as he knew it had changed. Okay, so back then it would have taken 20 years, right? How many people here feel like they could leave their job for 5 years and come back and step in where they were right now and take over where they were? Anybody? How about 3 years? 1 year. Do you think you could leave your job for 1 year, come back, and still know what was going on? Absolutely not, right? So we have exponential growth of information. We create the Library of Commerce every 4 minutes. That is a ton of information. Or how are we accessing it? How are we using it? So we are constantly feeling like this guy. So I want to start with 2 quotes. The first one is by George Santayana, and it was picked up by Winston Churchill and kind of bastardized. But those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And the second one is this one. And this came out of the Chronicle, which gave me the idea for this talk. And then I went to a conference in Portugal 3 days ago, and a whole bunch of the content was about this same subject. So I kind of gathered some of this topic that I'm talking about today, synthesized what they said, and so you were the first people to benefit from my conference in Portugal. So for her article, Millner says, innovation, this is what we're famous for these days, right? Changing the world through our amazing new ideas. Yet somehow we've managed to create an on-demand world that still has no effective solution for climate change, affordable housing, healthcare bankruptcies, or anything else that would fundamentally improve our lives or our futures. So what I'd like to do today is look back at tech, because we hear disruption a lot. And I just want to hypothesize that Uber is actually not disruption. That is just a better cab company. I will give you a new definition of disruption. You talked a lot about disruption today, and I agree with you. But there are different ideas of what disruption are, and I would say that most people who talk about disruption aren't actually disrupting the market. And it's going to take a lot more than what they're doing to actually disrupt. So let's take a look at that. Each technology that has been created comes with solutions. They create it for a reason. They're trying to solve a problem. And because they don't look at it well enough, and they don't look at the repercussions of what they've designed, it ends up causing more problems than it actually solves. So who knows who this is? And these are all, by the way, these are Victorian stories. So Rip Van Winkle was written by Irving Washington in the Victorian era, and he stole it from a German myth. Heidi of the Mountains was also stolen from a German myth. But this is the most popular book in the world still today. They made it into a TV show, movies, all of that. But basically, Heidi's a little girl. She's sickly. She's living in coal-sodden London, and they think there's something wrong with her, so they they boot her out to see Grandpa in the mountains. And suddenly she's away from London and she gets well, she gets healthy, she's hiking in the mountains and all that kind of stuff. Her life is transformed. So the story of Heidi wasn't about how coal creates sickness and disease and acid rain, and it was destroying the buildings in London and turning everything black, and everybody had black lung. Coal was the thing that saved them. It kept them from hyperthermia, and people could cook more efficiently. It was part of what started the Industrial Revolution, because factories ran on coal. The furnaces ran on coal, and fireplaces, and steam engines. Everything ran on coal. But it created an enormous amount of pollution while it did it. This is the most important revolution in the history of man, in my opinion. What is it? It's the gas light. So the gas light, before the gas light, at 5 o'clock when it got dark, everybody went home and they sat by their fire and they knitted. Once the gas light was in place, people could walk around at night feeling safe. They could go to evening events. They had factories that started working 24/7 because you could see. Injuries went down, theft went down, and the world changed completely because of the gas light. What happened next, though, was true disruption, the electric light, right? So who has any idea what the oldest operational machine in the world is? The oldest, constantly, currently operating machine in the world? Any guesses? Something you use every day. In production, in use, yes?
Cell phone.
Nope. 1911, the American electrical grid was invented. It's the same friggin' grid. And it was set up for coal. And so here we are trying to create revolutionary renewables, and we're trying to feed electric solar power into a coal grid. It doesn't work, right? It's not working. So I want everybody to write down Jessica Matthews. I just met this lady. She's a complete dynamo. She's amazing. She started Uncharted Power, Socket, and The Pulse. She's a Nigerian American, and she goes home to Nigeria for funerals and weddings, which apparently there's lots of them. And so she's home fairly regularly. When she goes home, her cousins sit in the dark once the sun goes down. There is no power grid in Nigeria. And the kids can't study. They're trying to study by kerosene lamp, just like they did before these gas lights. And so it's just like America in 1820, you can imagine. But dirt roads, no infrastructure, no running water, and she goes to visit. And she's like, what can I do to help these people? Here I am, I'm in Harvard Business School. What can I do? So she's sitting in her dorm room. She's 19, ladies and gentlemen. And she realizes that all her cousins, the boys, play soccer. So she puts a kinetic energy generator inside the soccer ball. Every 15 minutes of play gives 3 hours of homework time with a flashlight. But the little girls aren't allowed to play soccer, but they're allowed to jump rope. And so she creates a jump rope called the Pulse. 15 minutes of jumping rope gives them 3 hours of study time, so the little girls can study as well. And they're like, Jessica, this is great, but we need more. It gets dark at night, we're breathing kerosene fumes, we're breathing diesel, we're using generators to try and create lights, and there's no food storage with that, right? There's no refrigerators, there's nothing. Imagine, like full-time no glamping. This is camping, basically. So she goes back and she says, what can I do? It has to be portable. It has to be decentralized. No one's going to build a power plant in Nigeria, and we can't afford to put in the infrastructure, so what can we do? So Jessica has just applied for the permits for a decentralized micro-pocket, individualized system, and they are installing, it's going through the UL laboratories testing right now, and they're putting it in Connecticut. You walk on these panels that are made out of recycled plastic. When you ride your bike, you can ride a car. It can go through heat and cold. You can do anything, and the kinetic energy is stored, and it powers the system on a local level. You can also do it on bigger grids, but it's an expandable, portable, decentralized grid, which for the very first time could replace our grid that's been functioning since 1911. It's huge. And this lady is just astonishing. So, I mean, totally look her up. She's amazing. Jessica Matthews, and her business is Uncharted Power. Socket is the soccer ball, and the Pulse is the little girl's jump rope. Disney tried to get her to put it in tennis shoes and a bunch of other stuff. They wanted princess wear with her kinetic energy creator. And she's like, it's flattering, but I think I've got bigger things to do. She's like, I need to serve the underserved, not the princess worshipers. So, so we have this. So just to back up and tie together my point, disruption is when gas lights went out of business, right? Nobody asked for a bailout for the lamplighters, right? The lamplighters just went and got new jobs when the electrical grid went in. So now we got horse and buggies, same thing. You know, this was much faster than walking, this was faster than oxen. People used it for years and years and years, and then we got the horseless carriage. And horses create manure, and they create CO2, and you have to feed them, and they have to brush them, and all of that kind of stuff. So the horseless carriage, it also creates CO2. And as we know, it's created global warming and created huge problems for our society. So after the horseless carriage that runs on gas, we've got electric cars. And what's fascinating about all of these things is that on this structure, this frame, we're not reinventing the wheel. Elon Musk did not invent the car. He didn't have to invent tires or alloy or brakes or the way that the car goes together. He improved a battery maybe, you know, whatever. I mean, he did what he did some design, but he did not invent the car. So all of us are building on the scaffolding of previous inventions. And sentient beings were the first ones to ever do that, right? That's why we're getting such huge exponential progress, is because we are building on the backs of all the inventions that came before us. But could we be doing more to improve the planet and to solve those problems in the design phase rather than taking them to market and then discovering that we're destroying the earth by what we've created? The locomotive. So this doesn't seem like a big deal, but do you guys remember the Calistoga wagons and the push going west? People to come to California would take months, and something like 25% of the people died. And it was a very hard trip, and it took forever. And then the steam train came into position, and it took 3 days instead of months. That's disruption. The Calistoga wagon ceased to exist overnight. And then what's putting the trains out of business? Almost everything, right? Airplanes, you can now go across the country in 6 hours, and we complain that they lose our luggage and that our seat is uncomfortable, and you know, come on, first world problem, right? It's so much better than what it used to be. So this is a wooden ship, and the wooden ship industry was gigantic. Hundreds of thousands of people were employed in the wooden ship business. And then they started making ships out of iron and steel. And again, there was no bailout for the wooden ship people when they started making these. They moved from shipbuilding into Victorians. And they put their skills at making all of these fancy little gingerbread details and stuff like that and building houses by hand with hand-forged nails. All these houses are built out of old growth redwood. And literally, by the time this building boom in the Victorian era was over, there were almost no redwoods left. And President Roosevelt had to come in and do a special order to protect the last remaining redwoods. But what's interesting about the redwood is that its tensile strength is amazing. It makes it through the earthquakes. They are impervious to bugs, impervious to rot. You can leave one of these houses unpainted for almost 100 years, and the house is still standing and it's still fine. You scrape it and paint it, and it's still in good shape. city of San Francisco, in their great wisdom, tore down everything from City Hall to these buildings until a handful of citizens who I happen to know laid their bodies down in front of the bulldozers to keep them from tearing down the rest of them. And what the city built instead was plywood and concrete prisons, where instead of entire 3 or 4 generations of family living together in one house, grandma got a 1-bedroom apartment, the kids got a 1-bedroom apartment, grandma no longer could take care of the kids, they were in separate parts of the project, and it completely fractured this portion of the city, destroyed it, not to mention destroying not only part of our history, one of the very few things that are really super interesting about San Francisco, and it created housing that falls apart. Plywood falls apart, it gets eaten by bugs, it has to be maintained, and the city doesn't maintain them. So if we look at the Victorian, when it was built, they originally ran on coal and gas. Gas was considered an upgrade from coal or oil. And at that time, you have to remember, like in the 17th century, food preservation, and this portion of the talk came from John Cena from Singularity University. Food was preserved with salt and spices. And salt and spices from India were more expensive than gold. And the price was just held up by the fact that everybody needed to flavor and preserve their food. Then this guy in the 18th century named Frederick Tudor took some sawdust and some wood and created the first freezer. And he just went into lakes, cut a big chunk of ice out, and he happened to notice that as he was shipping ice around for drinks, that if he put a box of oranges on it, the oranges last longer. The honest to God did not know that, right? He had to discover that. And as soon as he created the ice freezer, the prices of spices dropped 70%. That's disruption. And then a guy named John, and this guy was called the Ice King. He controlled the ice market for like 25 years. And then this guy named John Gorey developed a mechanical ice making machine. And the price of ice dropped 80%. That's disruption, right? When something ceases to exist that existed before simply because of the technology that comes after it, that is disruption. If gaslights cease to exist except for in New Orleans, right? The horse and carriage, again, hansom cab rides in New York, otherwise it's cars. So in the 20th century, we created the compressor, and the compressor put ice out of business because we've got a refrigerator now that runs on a compressor. And now we have a digital refrigerator that tells us when our milk is gone, and it sets up our grocery buying list. But guess what the real disruption in this category is for the simple refrigerator? It's the Amazon blimp that is going to hang above your city. They're already testing it in multiple markets, and it is a drone delivery on demand. You don't have to go out and shop at the grocery. You don't have to keep fresh food in the refrigerator. You call, in 15 minutes, it's delivered into a box in your house. Whole Foods will deliver anything you want in 60 minutes. The price of refrigerators has already gone down 7%. Already having a disruptive effect on refrigeration. So hindsight, foresight. What can we do by looking backwards to get foresight into what's going to happen? What did these people not realize about the disruption that was coming? Could they have spent more time thinking about their product, not only the effect on the planet, but what kind of effect it would have as it went away? Are you designing the next Buggy Whip? So most of these resources depleted or exploited the earth. Strip mining, logging, damming, removal of wetlands, open lands. So I went to art school, and I'll tell you the only valuable thing that I learned in art school. And I'm going to share it with you today, and you can keep it forever and save the money that you spent having to go to art school. So let's say you're working on a representational piece in the landscape form, and you're painting away, and you get stuck, and it's just not looking right. The motion's not good, the light's not there. In art school, they teach you turn the painting upside down. What does that do? It turns it into an abstract painting, and suddenly you're dealing with the abstract shapes and colors, and you start working with the abstract shapes instead of trying to be representational. It changes your perspective of what you're looking at. So while looking at the past changes your perspective on the future, just turning something over, completely looking at it from a different perspective changes how you solve the problem. Everybody in this room is trying to solve a problem and come up with some great thing. When you're designing it and you get to that point, you're like, wow, this is great. What is the effect on the earth going to be? And here's my challenge for you. Here is my thinking on this, that maybe your product will be the Buggy Whip, right? But if it also contributed to saving the earth, that is your legacy. That is part of your alignment with yourself and with the future. So that even though your product is no longer important, what you did with the product and how it served the earth is important. So my point is that you can have it both. You can make money and you can save the planet. It doesn't have to be an either or. And everyone is so focused on the money, making the next big product, they're not looking at the implications. So let me just leave you with this. The guys who created the HBomb, they were just solving a problem. And they didn't realize that they had lost control of it until the military-industrial complex took it away from them and decimated cities. And they all regretted what they designed. You have to think about the implications of what you're designing. Because all of these people wanted to create warmth or light or travel, but they also created other problems with it. Like this. So there's a plastic bag at the very deepest part of the ocean, of the earth. There are plastic bottles on uninhabited islands. Nobody lives there, and bottles wash up on shore. There's 32 tons of garbage on an island close to Australia because it's close to Australia. The plastic bottle, the plastic issue is so beyond out of control. And we're doing what we can, right? We're walking around with our Hydro flasks, we're using recyclable paper cups, we're doing what we can. But this is a world crisis happening, and we're contributing to it. LEED certification. So thinking back about those Victorians, they're doing their best, right? LEED is saying, oh, your house should be energy efficient, and that's a good thing. And we'll give you a certification if you make your house energy efficient. But to build this house, you're going to Home Depot, and you are buying a whole bunch of stuff that made trees get cut down, they're preserved with chemicals, they off-gas VO2s, and I'm going to say this totally radical thing, that an old house that already exists is more green than a house that's been LEED certified. And if you take an air monitor into a brand new house, it's the same thing as that new car smell. That's poison for you. It's poison for you and your family. Bamboo floors off gas, current taping and paint off gases. Old houses are green, and they don't kill any new resources in order to do it. And every time we tear down an old house, we've hurt the earth just a little more. This is the image credits. So in conclusion, make money, but design for a better planet. And then your karma or your destiny will have contributed to the planet instead of destroying it. Thank you.